3 or 4 cars ago, I indulged a long postponed dream when my daughter had become a licensed driver, had a car of her own, and I no longer was obligated to haul her and a half a dozen of her cheerleader friends around town. I traded in my trusty Volvo station wagon, and I bought a 2-seater convertible. It caused a buzz in the church, of course, in much the way that growing a beard will, or wearing a suit that's not either navy blue or solid black. It may have been a midlife crisis, I don't know, childish indulgence, call it whatever you want. I loved it. In fact, I loved it so much that a month after I'd bought it, I called the used car salesman where I'd bought it to thank him for selling it to me because it had made me so happy. There was silence on the other end of the line, though. Finally, he said, "And?" I said, "That's it. I just called to thank you for selling it to me." This gray-haired old hand in the used car business had evidently never sold a car to a buyer who called to thank him. He was sincerely speechless. Experience had taught him to expect only the worst. If you get a call from someone who just bought a used car from you, it's bound to be a complaint because people almost never call with good news. Oddly enough, being a minister is a lot like being a used car salesman. No one ever schedules an appointment with me to tell me that their kids are doing really well, that they've never had a run-in with the law, and that they are dating the most charming and intelligent person. No one ever drops by to say, "I just wanted to let you know that we are happier and more in love than we were 10 years ago when you did our wedding." In fact, for the last few months, every time my phone has rung, I've been a little gun-shy. I've been half scared to answer it. And there is a palpable relief that you feel when it is someone who isn't in the middle of a crisis. They're not at the hospital or the police station, and they were just wondering if I was free for dinner. I've even been somewhat relieved when it was someone calling me to ask for someone's phone number or email address, even if I had given them that phone number or email address within the last 48 hours. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Of course, I have no idea how many married couples are really happy or how many are just quietly tolerating one another. I'm afraid that many settle into a kind of quiet acquiescence. The thrill is gone, the passion has cooled, and over time, even the curiosity goes away as you become so familiar with one another that you not only finish one another's sentences, but you can become irrationally irritated by the fact that she is always losing her keys and he never remembers to lock the back door. Poets and playwrights have always waxed eloquent about romantic love, but in all honesty, for most of human history, being in love or being happy or feeling fulfilled was not relevant to marriage. Most marriages were either directly arranged or they were substantially arranged, and couples stayed together out of a survival need as much as they stayed together out of any religious values or their reputation. When homes were lit by oil lamps, food was cooked on a wood fire stove, and clothes were washed in a tub and hung on a line to dry, whether your husband had gotten a little big in the middle or your wife's breasts had begun to sag was not something that you spent time worrying about. 100 years ago, pastors did not have couples coming in to see them to say, "I don't know, it's just not the same. I just don't feel happy," that their marriage wasn't fulfilling. In the days before refrigeration, they were more worried about whether the meat in the smokehouse was going to remain edible or whether their old horse was going to make it through another winter. It was World War II that began to see the American family in rapid evolution. Women were then forced from their homes into offices and manufacturing floors. Prior to the war, most women in America had contact with their family members, a few neighbors, and church members. But in the world of commerce, in the midst of a global conflict, their world changed. It changed, and they were not necessarily eager to go back to the life that they had had before the war. I wasn't alive then, but I was born a few years later, and I grew up hearing sermons and religious debates that were focused on shaming women back into their homes. A married woman with children who tried to also have a career was portrayed as being inherently irresponsible, that they were maybe wanting to be wayward, maybe they were sinners because they didn't want to stay home and take care of their family. My father came home from the war, got a job with the relatively newly formed Rural Electrification Corporation, the REA, and for the next 40 years he was involved with stretching the copper wires that made modern life, with all of its labor-saving appliances and conveniences, possible even in rural parts of Kentucky. This time period not only saw the divorce rate rise, but in recent years it has seen more and more people choosing to live alone. More than half of Americans are not married. Women no longer need a husband to bring home the bacon, chop the firewood, and slaughter the pig. They don't even need a husband to have and to raise a child. I have lived alone for 23 years. I don't need someone to iron my clothes. I don't iron them. I don't need someone to cook for me, and I don't need someone to explain to me how wrong I am about everything I say or do. Or maybe that was just my home life. I don't mean to be speaking for you. I'm generalizing, of course, but for most of human history, family stability was maintained by the fact that there really wasn't another practical choice. Families stayed together for unconscious psychological reasons, sometimes physiological reasons, because humans are more like dogs than any other animal. We are pack animals. But we also stayed together out of economic necessity and for sheer survival. For the most part, ladies and gentlemen, that chapter of human history is closed. Now couples largely stay together because they have chosen to do so. So why do they choose to do so? What reason do people have for cohabitating? There is a lot of sexual impulse that we inherit through evolution, and that's certainly a big part of it, at least in the beginning. But this is one thing that same-sex couples and heterosexual couples have in common. Sexual frequency starts at a high point and declines very quickly. It may be uncomfortable to talk about, but it is nearly a universal event. You'll hear some people saying it just ain't so, but there are more liars than the person who occupies the White House. There's an old Italian proverb that says, in the first 5 years of marriage, you are lovers. In the second 5 years, you are friends. In the third 5 years, it's like your brother and sister. And in the fourth 5 years, it's like your two sisters. Now we tend to live longer than our ancestors, and the question we might pose to anyone who starts towards marriage after their childbearing years are past, maybe even when their careers have already peaked or been put to bed, what is it that would make you sacrifice your independence for some measure of company, companionship? What would make you give up your self-determination and your confidence that you're generally right about most things that you think and do in order to live with someone under one roof? Again, I think of this on a personal level. Having spent most of my adult life as a single person, what would ever make me change my marital status? What would make it worth it? And I have an answer. And that answer is meaning. There was a wonderful moment in Robin Williams' movie, The Dead Poets Society, in which he tells his students, medicine, law, business, engineering, These are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, this is what we stay alive for. My late parents were married for more than 60 years, and I do not doubt that there were moments of real emotional connection between them. But as an observer of nearly 50 of those years, their marriage was very much about function. They were Puritans, and they had a Protestant work ethic that would have killed Paul Bunyan. They worked, they cleaned, they cooked, they mowed, they planted, they harvested, they canned, they froze. But I never saw them read to one another. If it were not for the daily paper that each held in silence before going to bed, I wouldn't even be sure that either one of them knew how to read. And if you don't read, how is that different from being illiterate? Last year, when my good friend Dan and Mary met, and the two of them seemed to just jump off the cliff of any rational conduct into a headlong plummet of love towards marriage, I began to wonder what I would say when it came time to officiate at their marriage. Now, Mary, of course, has her heart set on me doing an impersonation of a traditional Christian minister who will deliver a proper biblical sermon. But you know, Mary, I am a Bible scholar. I can tell you something about the Bible and marriage. Jesus, from whom Christians draw their identity, was ostensibly never married, and Catholics insist that he went to his grave as a virgin. In the Gospels, there is no point at which Jesus utters the word marriage in a sentence in which he doesn't also mention divorce. And the self-appointed Apostle Paul, who wrote the largest part of the New Testament, does mention marriage, and he is quite straightforward about it. Paul says, just don't do it. So, Mary, because I love you, I promise that I will find some passage of Scripture to completely take out of context and apply it to your wedding. But you and I both know that neither Jesus nor Paul were really great family men. But I found a bit of poetry from the brilliant and sometimes disturbingly eccentric Mexican poet and artist Frida Kahlo. The whole of the verse is magical. The whole thing is great. But it ends, as great poems always do, in a breathtaking crescendo. You deserve a lover who takes away the lies and brings you hope and coffee and poetry. I have never come so close to getting a tattoo in my life as when I read that verse. You deserve a lover who brings you coffee. That's the most basic and mundane act of grace in a sleepy household, isn't it? Just to bring your lover, your friend, your sister a cup of coffee in bed. The first one who wakes up brings the other one a cup of coffee. That's just the civil thing to do. But it is a hero who takes away the lies of the world. Lies like nobody really cares. Lies like nothing really matters. Lies like everything is going to hell in a handbasket. It's your hero that takes away the lies, who is strong enough to bring hope to the bedside. But hope is not in a cup of coffee. Hope is in defiance in the face of contrary evidence. It is a reason to believe even when the world is full of darkness and full of lies. But a lover who will read you poetry, that's a lover who will share their heart with you. That's a lover who will let you see their weaknesses and their brilliance. Someone who will read poetry to you as you drift off to sleep will still be there in the morning and will bring you coffee, even on your very last day. And you will greet your mortality with the ring of their poetry in your ears. Te mereces un amante que se sevilla las mentadas e te tragia esperanza, café y poesia.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.